Right, so Michael Gove, old droopy chops himself. A man who, in 2018, once said there is no point in having high environmental standards if you allow them to be undercut is, in 2023, allowing them to be undercut. The party that once promised to make the UK the cleanest and greenest on earth with the most far-reaching environmental programme is now placing our, thanks to them, already fetid, dying and floater-filled waterways at further environmental risk because if you thought our rivers, lakes and seafronts couldn't get any more toxic than they already are, already making people seriously ill as they have, exposures to E.Coli and the rest of it the minute you take a dip, now Gove and the Tories have somehow decided they can get away with making them even worse, adding yet more to our water bills in return. That's nice of them, isn't it? Frankly, everything coming out of Gove's mouth is pollution to some extent, usually only to our ears. But his actions are going to stink up our rivers yet further. So what's he going to do then, Damo? Well, Gove is, as some of you will no doubt be aware, the Secretary of State for Levelling Up Housing and Communities. He's not involved in Defra, though he has been in the past. So what's he got against our rivers? Well, it's all to do with his housing brief, because under new local authority planning legislation being passed, Gove is scrapping something called nutrient neutrality. Now, nutrient neutrality is an environmental protection and it places a responsibility on local authorities when deciding on planning applications to not approve developments that will add nutrients to rivers. Now, when you think of the word nutrients, you tend to imagine it as a good thing from a diet perspective, perhaps. But as far as rivers and waterways go, this can mean runoff into rivers that can damage the ecology, phosphates and nitrates. People who keep fish will know what I'm talking about with these. They don't do aquatic wildlife any good. Algae builds up, removes oxygen from the environment. Now, from a development viewpoint, this can come about as a result of increased runoff due to construction and indeed from the new homes resulting from that. Of course, all of our rivers are already polluted because they're being filled with copious amounts of cack, courtesy of our privatised water industry, dumping sewage into them with seemingly gleeful abandon. As much as you may not want to think about what you flush as being nutritious, these two are nutrients being added to our waters. Tories Coffee has already kicked cleaning our rivers up long into touch, saying it'll be into the 2060s before we've cleaned up what is being dumped now. Not that they're stopping the dumping still in any way, shape or form. Every day there are new posts on social media, new examples of new sewage spills somewhere. You only need to follow somebody like Fergal Sharkey to know all about this. There were 5 spills just last week here in Cornwall in the summer holidays in a part of the country reliant on tourism. Now, Gove announced this scrappage alongside his boss, Rishi Sunak, who just happened to take a private helicopter to Norwich for it just to kick the environment that little bit more, and proving his former International Environment Minister, Zach Goldsmith, absolutely right about him when he said Sunak has no interest in the environment, because announcing a house building plan is a big positive news story. Whoops, never mind about the rivers again, eh? Not one river in England passes a chemical cleanliness test anymore. Already, incidentally, not one. They definitely won't be changing anytime soon going forwards, being abused by the Tories still onwards like this will. Now, the government claim all this house building will bring into existence 100,000 new homes by 2030. Now that keeping rivers clean is no longer a planning issue anymore, that it's an issue for the water companies. So the first thought that came to my mind was, well, they're going to build these houses by rivers then. All of them are going to be by rivers. This is what this is driving at then. Who would want to live in one next to a river when the river is brown and stinks of shit? Living near rivers also presents something of a greater flooding risk, and this tickled me somewhat considering how flat and low-lying much of Norfolk is. Great place to launch this pledge, this policy, is not only do you risk flooding arguably more there than most other areas, but it won't just be water entering your home in all likelihood, will it? Now, as some of you are aware, I'm a Green Party town councillor, and I do sit on the planning committee, and living in West Cornwall, in Helston, which has a river in it, a not insignificant part of the town is at flood risk from it, the flood risk area. And this is equally a planning consideration. So it does make me wonder just how much nutrient neutrality being scrapped will make a difference from a flooding perspective. After all, surely this is a planning issue that only comes into force when it relates to nearby watercourses close to a planned development. So I was curious about this, and the government do have a flood risk map area, interactive jobby, where you can look up your local area and see what flood risk, for example, Norwich, where Sunak and Gove went, had, for example. It's not my part of the country after all. Were my assumptions about it right? So I got this image from that site. The little red square you might be able to make out there is Norwich, and I zoomed out to encompass a fair old chunk of southeast England too. All that dark blue, that's flood risk zone 3. It means there's a high probability of flooding from rivers or the sea, and means flood risk assessments still need to be done in relation to any planning developments. Or can we expect them to get binned too in the future? Is it more of a case that claims of house building by abandoning nutrients neutrality, which is incidentally an EU regulation we're binning, just as we bin the ones associated with water companies flooding our rivers with effluents were? So yet another Brexit benefit, folks. Keep adding them up. The light blue areas, just for interest's sakes, are flood zone 2, so an intermediate risk of flooding, and the rest is flood zone 1, low risk. It's because of this flood requirement, I'm minded to think the government either haven't thought the likely success of this plan out through, or it'll end up amounting to nothing from a development perspective, and Gove and Sunak might know that. It's just a desperate attempt at a positive headline grab for housing for one day of news. And that probably hasn't really even succeeded at doing that, because the pollution side of the story has become the bigger talking point. But let's set that aside for a moment then. Let's assume the housing gets built. Let's take the flooding aspect out of the equation for a moment. Let's just look at this purely from a pollution perspective. Housing gets built, balls to nutrient neutrality, rivers get worse. Who pays for that? The developers? Nope. They're the ones who've been lobbying for this. According to them, some 120,000 housing developments have been on hold because of this nutrient neutrality business. But hang on, they can take mitigating measures to prevent nutrient spills. It's not stopping them from building at all. They could be creating new wetlands. They act as a filter for it all, as well as being a much valued and sadly lost environment to much wildlife in the UK. Artificial catchments for it can be built, or buffer zones created. So it's not like these developments have actually been stopped at all by having to adhere to nutrient neutrality. The developers simply don't want to spend money on doing it, and the government have agreed with them. We've stunk up the rivers already, a bit more won't matter, will it? And the prols will pay through their water bills. Developers presumably go, hurrah for Rishi and Mikey, have a lovely donation. Protecting the environment eats into developers' profits, and when greed is their god, the Tories can't bear to see such people with sad expressions on their faces. But let's face it, the housing they'll be building won't be social housing either, not next to rivers. It'll be more luxury end stuff none of us can afford anyway, as well as further buy-to-let opportunities for those with burgeoning property portfolios. And if you're minded to leap to the defence of smaller developers, perhaps thinking it is they who might benefit too, guess which companies have seen a sudden surge in their share prices since this announcement and are now topping the FTSE 100 index? Yes, funnily enough, it's house builders. Why wouldn't their share prices increase now they're no longer responsible for mitigating the pollution they cause anymore? The investors will love this. Barratt Development's share price pinged up 3.43%. Taylor Wimpey's share price went up 2.88%. When both companies are worth in the ballpark of £4 billion, that's a lot of money they've suddenly added to their own value, all on the basis of eroding environmental protections. Will Labour act to undo it? That's certainly the big question if they're going to come into power. Well, investors need certainty, has been Starmer's mantra. It was over the oil and gas industry, after all. So given these share prices, perhaps we'd best not hope for him to step in if he does become PM. So go the Green Party housing policy for a moment, just to round off, though. Under a Green government, housing will become a human right, affordable, mixed tenure, and of a standard that meets people's needs. All house building will adhere to environmental protections. Rent controls and properly secured tenancies for renters will be introduced and break up the monopolisation larger developers are putting more control in the hands of the people who live in developed areas. They'd also abolish Help to Buy, which loses social housing provision and drives up prices, and would take the heat out of the housing market by making it incumbent on the Bank of England to have a duty to constrain house price growth. There is tons more housing policy on the Green Party website. It's just a hint. But it's so much of a departure from mainstream politics and is exactly what we need right now. So what do you think of the Tory policy? Do you care if you pay more to clean up developers' messes? What would you prefer to see? Let me know in the comments and be part of the conversation. Thanks for watching. I hope you found the video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily as ever. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where the absolute theft that has been water privatisation that has led to all of the pollution of our rivers has now been demonstrated as the abject failure it was always going to be. And I'll hopefully see you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.